Well, hey guys, and welcome to a new video. One we haven't done in a while. We haven't done an interview in quite a while, and we're quite lucky today actually to have Charles Hoskinson, one of the co-founders of Ethereum, founder and CEO of IOHK, and really the face of Cardano with us. Charles, really appreciate you coming on board. I'm not going to give a lengthy introduction because I think most people should know who you are, and if they don't, a little bit of research would tell people everything they need to know. You've been in the industry for a long time. You're a significant figure. Why don't you tell us a bit about what you got going on at the moment?
Well, the nice part about IOHK is we kind of get to do a little bit of everything at the company. We're a research company, we're an enterprise blockchain firm, and we're also a cryptocurrency development firm. And so among the three verticals, we're really pushing hard. On the research side, we've published more than 40 papers, more than 20 have gone through peer review, and they cover everything from consensus protocols to zero-knowledge proofs to multi-party computation to softer things like incentives and game theory and law and policy. And we're collaborating with more than 10 universities, dozens of professors all around the world. So it's just really amazing to see how far and how vast that's grown and the kinds of partnerships we have there. On the enterprise blockchain side, really that's more Pan-African focus and a little bit in Asia, in particular Mongolia. And the Pan-African focus is about agricultural technology, government services like voting and property registration. And at the moment, we're right now deep in the weeds training 23 girls in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. As soon as that class is finished, we'll go ahead and roll them over to a coffee traceability and supply chain management pilot. We have a lot of plans throughout the continent. And then obviously on the cryptocurrency side, what we're mostly known for is Cardano, but we have other products in the portfolio that are coming out at some point. And Cardano's coming along quite nicely. We as a company learned a heck of a lot about how to build and launch a cryptocurrency and what not to do, as much as we learned about what to do. And there we really get to flex some cool muscles like formal methods and functional programming and so forth. And these are just really powerful techniques that can do everything from verify that your multi-sig is correct to verify that your zero-knowledge proof-based private system can't counterfeit money to your consensus algorithm works. So it's good to be able to use these types of services and these types of techniques in the space. It's real hard because they never really were designed for short-term projects. They were designed for Boeing and NASA and healthcare software with long time horizons and big bloated budgets. And to try to get that into an agile structure is really hard and really difficult. But I think that's one of the USPs of our company. And we've grown now to well over 150 people. We're in about 16 countries. And I get to still hang out at home from time to time. Right now in warm, sunny Colorado. And I'll be back on the road here pretty soon.
Oh, nice. So I want to probably touch on a little bit. You mentioned about the research work you did. So the last time I really looked into Cardano in detail, I believe was late 2017, if not 2018. I did like a SWOT review on it. And the one thing that stood out to me about Cardano was the level of academia, the level of kind of professional research approach that really wasn't being seen from what I could see with a lot of other projects. How have you seen the landscape change over the past 12 to 18 months in that regard? And do you guys think you're still an outlier in the way you approach things being so academic based?
Well, there's some very encouraging things. First, you want everybody to be academically based, both as a product manager and also as an investor in the community, somebody who cares about these projects as a neutral third party, because everybody's making claims. And the whole point of peer review, the whole point of a science-based approach is saying, let's sort fact from fiction, and let's find out which claims seem to be realistic and reasonable versus very unreasonable. So if you hear people say things like, well, I can do 500,000 transactions per second at sub-second block times and yada, yada, you're like, okay, yeah, well, even if you can do that, exactly how did you accomplish that? What's the trade-off? And oftentimes it usually means massive centralization or a permanent oligarchy, or it was, assuming that all the computers are on a local network or something like that. And when you put it into more realistic cryptocurrency-esque assumptions, your performance goes down quite a bit, or you don't have a sustainable system. So from one dimension, what crypto winter's done for us is it's enabled the space to have a return to normalcy. And we're starting to talk much more about technology, much more about science, much more about actual execution and getting features out and the hard job of adoption. than just about 10x's or 100x's or publicity stunts to try to improve marketing. Although some projects are still trying to do that, they're getting less and less successful. And in terms of science-based competitors, we are seeing that. Particularly, you have things like Unit-E, which was recently announced, and that's Stanford, UIUC, and other institution effort with a lot of great professors. And then you got Algorand and other projects along those lines who they're legitimately really solid tech, really solid papers have gone through peer review. In some cases, Turing Award winners who are working together. And that's the Nobel Prize in Computer Science, married with good product teams, married with experienced Silicon Valley style entrepreneurs, married with good engineers who have good engineering practices. So the landscape really does look a lot different in 2019 than it did even when we launched in 2017 or when I entered the space in 2011. I mean, just basic things like product and project management, quality assurance, having a help desk. These things were oddities and huge value adds in 2015 or something like that. But now it's, you don't have it, you're just done. You're toast. There's no way you're going to actually survive. Furthermore, we're having a pretty big discussion about computation and about what needs to be on the blockchain versus off the blockchain, and the relationship between a dApp, a blockchain-based application, and the server and the client. And we're starting to understand that maybe we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we take a step back and we say, listen, it's okay to have a server. It's okay to have some logic run on a particular client. It just, you have to look at things as services and recognize that certain services may run better in a trustless environment, but not necessarily all of them. So with Ethereum, with the pendulum kind of swung way too far in one direction, then things like CryptoKitties and other events kind of woke us up and made us realize that we have to go back in the other direction a little bit, but not as far as we were. And so the space is now having these realistic discussions, and we see them in the Lightning community, we see them in the verified computation community, we see them in the MPC guys. We also see them in a lot of scalability discussions, and that's very encouraging to have those discussions. I think the overall it's a healthier space. It's less about speculation. It's more about pragmatism. It's more product oriented. There definitely is some good science going on now, and I love seeing these papers because we learn from them just as much as they learn from ours, and it makes our products better. And also among the elite people in the space, like the core companies in the space, there's an era of more collaboration occurred. For example, the Ethereum Foundation did reach out to us, asked us if we were willing to relicense our Mantis client, which is an Ethereum client written in Scala, to Apache 2. I couldn't even get a ticket to DevCon, and my name was like an insult in that community just a year ago. So the fact that we actually have a dialogue, whether it's productive or not, or goes anywhere or not, is a huge step forward, and it shows you that people are starting to set petty rivalries aside, and the space is maturing out of necessity.
Now, given how long you've been in this space for, I'm sure you get asked this question a lot, but you're probably one of the more qualified in the industry to really give a good holistic perspective on it. The state of the crypto landscape, and kind of touching on what you mentioned earlier about sentiment, how is this any different from any previous bear markets? I mean, do you see similarities, or is this different? And if it is different, why do you think it is?
When I entered Bitcoin, I remember it went from $30 to $1, $1 up to $4, and $4 it held at for a little bit, and then it went from $4 to 250, collapsed down to like 80. Went from 80 to 1200, 1200 to 250, 250 up to 20,000, and now we're at like 3,600. So we have a lot of bear and boom cycles, and if you've been in long enough, you're kind of used to it. You get a pretty stoic phase. The difference, though, is that in 2017 there was a global awakening, and it brought in millions of people. If you look at the amount of Coinbase and Bittrex and Binance accounts created during that year, it was in the millions. And all of a sudden, not only did we have a speculative surge, but we had a speculative surge with a global audience. So it was no longer we can succeed and fail, and if we fail, who cares? Like 20 people are watching. It's we fail, there's 20 million people watching. They have their life savings, and governments are watching. So the stakes of a collapse, the stakes of a bear market are much more significant, and they're much more painful for a lot of people. And as a consequence, this one is a bit different. And in fact, it has the ability to encourage regulation, in some cases much bad regulation and bad policy, or sometimes good regulation, good policy. It also means that people are held to a much higher standard, higher account. Like they actually have to articulate their vision, their product, have a plan to deliver, be held accountable to milestones and releases, explain why you couldn't release or explain why things couldn't happen. And we just didn't have that before. It was all aspirational. We kept talking about, no, this is how smart contracts are going to make every self-driving car have its own bank account. And while I'm sleeping, my car can be driving around, delivering drunks to their homes. And I'll wake up in the morning and, the autonomous puke cleaner cleaned up my seats and I didn't even have to worry about it. And my bank account just has money in it. I split it with the car. The car pays for its own maintenance. I mean, that's what we were talking about, but there was no plan. How are we actually going to get from where we're at to reality? And now in 2019, because the stakes are so much higher, there's so much pressure, we actually are forced to talk about reality. How are we going to get adoption? How are we going to get consumers to use these things? And in some cases, what part of that vision was deeply impractical? It's kind of sad because you lose a little bit of the jazz hands and magic that made things so exciting. But on the other hand, it's necessary, and it just shows you're becoming an adult.
Do you think the kind of the fervor and euphoria will ever return in the future? Do you think that's ever going to come back, or do you think that's done for?
I think it's called the Avatar effect. Do you ever watch the movie Avatar back in 2009?
A long time ago, yeah.
A lot of people, when they watched that movie, when they first saw it, they were just blown away. And they said, wow, this movie is so incredible. It's so magical. And really, when you watch it again, you're like, okay, it's Dances with Wolves on a Moon in Space with blue people. It's not a very complicated movie. And the special effects, they look pretty good, but they weren't as magical and overwhelming as when we first saw them. And so a lot of things work that way. When you first get exposed to new concepts like this idea that we can make decisions without a leader, or concepts like I can teleport value anywhere in the world instantaneously, or I can raise money off of a forum post, millions of dollars, and I don't have to go through traditional VC. Initially that's incredibly magical, and everybody goes, wow, that's the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. But then over time, the business side starts kicking in, and you get used to that, and then you start asking, well, how do we make it practical? And again, it's the adulting or the institutionalization, professionalization of the industry. And in a sense, you do lose a little bit of the euphoria, but on the other hand, you do actually have to deliver, and things have to get real, and products have to get solid and useful. And that's where we're at in our innovation cycle. Now, will it ever return? The minute that we start coming up with better experiences, more magical experiences, it does. Like, for example, the iPhone. Everybody kind of knew that mobile computing was going to be a big thing. Microsoft had a strategy, Nokia had a strategy, and others had strategies. But nobody was able to really stitch all those pieces together quite the way that Apple did. And it blew everybody away, the whole industry away. And this was, years after the dot-com collapse and years after everybody had gotten online and, had already gotten used to the way things were. So it's entirely possible that after we exit the infrastructure phase of the cryptocurrency space and we start stitching things together, we will return to that euphoria and wow factor. But instead of it being a conceptual wow factor, like, wow, we can move money anywhere in the world, or wow, I can raise money anywhere in the world, it's a product. And that product actually does something we've never seen before. And we're just blown away by it. And then that's kind of like the second generation of it. No one really gets wowed by the iPhone anymore, even though the iPhones today are, just magical compared to what was released in 2007. But we do get wowed by the HoloLens and these types of things. We get wowed by VR and AR. But it's in the conceptual stage, and eventually somebody will release a great product, and then the cycle repeats itself. So innovation works this way. We go from one cycle to the next cycle, and our space is now in that part. We're in the deep infrastructure phase, and exiting that, we'll enter the experiences phase, and then we'll have another euphoria with the experiences phase, and then eventually the iPhone will get boring, and we'll have to move on to the next thing.
Yeah, I think you nailed it in a sense that's exactly kind of the way I felt things were as well. And when you had that pump and all these new people coming in, so many of these features, this terminology, decentralized applications and smart contracts was so new to everyone at the time. But as all these people came in and the media cycle ramped up with it and all the information was spread, it only took kind of several months for everyone to start to learn these terms, to learn what they did, and to learn kind of how the back end of these protocols work. And I think a lot of the magic faded because the people that stayed in the game their knowledge grew with everyone else at the same time, and there's not a whole lot of new concepts and experiences for anyone at the moment. Not until, like you said, and until we start to see actual good user experiences and actual good products. And it was interesting, yesterday I was browsing some LAPs, some Lightning Network apps, and you can see, the apps that are actually using the Lightning Network effectively. It's an incredibly exciting experience, but we're still in the very, very early days, and I think there's a lot of work left to fully exploit the capabilities of this technology, and it's probably going to take a couple of years. Would you kind of agree on that?
Yeah, I say about 3 to 5 years. We're still in the deep infrastructure phase because the base ledgers just aren't capable enough. Most of them are blind, deaf, and dumb, and they can't scale because they're replicated systems and they're using very old protocols, and we really don't have good governance layers to these systems, so it's hard to decide who pays and who decides how to upgrade the system. So the interoperability, scalability, and sustainability components really do need to be worked on heavily, and that's another 3 to 5 years. That's one of the principal reasons why we decided to work on the Cardano project, because we wanted to kind of push that to the forefront, kind of like what we did, what I did with Vitalik and others on Ethereum. We pushed smart contracts to the forefront, and the hope is that at some point the industry will consolidate to a collection of good best practices and principles. And we also have frank conversations about a lot of things that are difficult. For example, if you want a homogeneous replicated system and everybody has to have a full copy of the blockchain, what happens when the blockchain gets to several petabytes or exabytes in size? Well, and under that scenario, either the Google or the NSA are going to have it. So you can just pick which one you want to get it from, right? So you're going to have to make some compromises and move to a sharded system. In the process of doing that, you lose availability and you may end up trusting some actors. So good science can help you move the trade-off profile so you can get the benefits of the old systems without necessarily having to take their downsides. But you can only go so far because there are some theoretical limitations. And that's where we're at in the industry at the moment. It's just trying to understand what are the impossibility theorems, what are the absolute physical limitations of how far we can push in one particular direction, and what trade-offs are acceptable. It's perfectly legitimate to run a system where you have 21 nodes on Amazon Web Services and people are deploying to them, but that's not, and 90% of the supply is owned by 1% of the people, but that's not cryptocurrency to a lot of people in the industry. But for some people, they say that's fine, and it's okay to reverse transactions, and it's okay to reimburse people who've been hacked, or resurrect dead money, or things like that, or sometimes take money from people for the greater good, whatever that means. So these are discussions ahead. Vitalik recently brought up, not too long ago, this concept of rent for storage or for dApps, where you deploy something and maybe it doesn't live on the blockchain forever. Maybe you have to keep putting Ether into it to keep it there, and if not, it gets pruned out. Now, the original Bitcoin ethos is save everything forever. And that may be practical if you have a very limited scope. But when you start going to these big global scale systems that are distributed internets, it's just not practical if there's no economic incentive to do it. So it'll take a few years to work our way out. Then and only then will we be ready for truly exciting experiences, because we're building on bedrock. We're building on granite. The internet wouldn't have never really taken off if everybody had to know how to use a command line interface browser or something like that. It was only until the internet got sufficiently fast, we had a couple of different great use cases, good infrastructure, and a lot of the model itself, like how are we going to do e-commerce, how are we going to do scripting, how are we going to do the cookie, what's the web browser going to look like. Once those things had set, then and only then can you get the Facebooks and the YouTubes and really get the Googles to that level. And that's what we need to aspire to. Is we need to get those standards set, get the infrastructure set, and then we can get to the experiences. But the problem is it's not a sexy process. It's not like every day I can say, hey, we just changed everything, and hey, we just published a paper, and and now suddenly everybody gets a unicorn in their yard. No, it's like, hey, we just proved that this little component is secure. Or, hey, we just proved that UTXO accounting is equivalent to Ethereum style accounting, and we have a model to move between the two. So who cares? But each of those is a brick and a very large foundation that once they're all set, you can then go live in that house and then decorate it, and then people kind of get it. They say, all right, yeah, this makes sense.
So touching on the point about the hacking that you mentioned earlier, one thing I wanted to get your perspective on, again, because I think you're one of the most qualified in this space for this, is around Ethereum Classic. Now, what I want perspective on is once it had the 51% attack recently, how should blockchains be viewed once this occurs? I mean, should they then be seen as compromised? I mean, how should the greater ecosystem view these projects, these protocols, when something major like that happens? Should they be disbanded? I mean, what are the kind of thoughts and perspectives you have on that?
Well, it's kind of funny to say, here's your security model. Like, if it rains, I'll bring an umbrella. And then you step outside the assumptions of what makes your system secure, and then suddenly everybody complains the system's not secure. Proof of work only works if the majority of the miners are honest. So if there are cases where they're not, it's not a failure of proof of work. It's not a failure of the cryptocurrency. It's just basically a scenario that your model doesn't cover. Just like, a lot of applications aren't so secure if somebody has access to your laptop or your cell phone. They're able to look at things. Who cares if you're using PGP? If I have access to your application and I can use it to decrypt your email messages, that's not a failure of PGP. And that's not a failure of the protocol or the cryptography. It's just that security model doesn't cover that type of attack. Now, what is much more meaningful is not the attack. It's how the community responds to the attack and how you move beyond that. What innovation you bring, what social processes you bring, how much resilience you have. If you look at the history of Bitcoin, it is littered with incidents. Interpersonal drama, exchanges being hacked, collapse of Mt. Gox, the Silk Road dilemma. There's so many incidents throughout. Yet 10 years later, Bitcoin's still here. People are still loyal to. People still like building on it. So who cares if proof of work can have scenarios where 51% attack occurs? The minority chain will still be honest, and eventually will overcome the dishonest majority and become the majority, and that'll become the legitimate chain. So it's a self-healing, resilient system. And socially, the system is very strong and very powerful. So that's the way I look at these things. I'm less draconian about it. If your end goal is to hand the driver keys over to machines and AI and assume that the protocols are infallible and they'll never be wrong, you're always going to be disappointed, because these protocols and machines are built by human beings, not God. So no matter how good they are, the machines will eventually have some flaw that requires human intervention to fix them. The strength is that you can come together in a decentralized way to fix it without creating a God, without creating a dictator, a beneficent leader, and saying this leader will lead us out of this. If you have to keep regressing to centralization to solve the problems of decentralization, you're neither decentralized nor worthy of it. So that's how we should judge these types of things. Now, in particular with Ethereum Classic, we're a bit frustrated in that ecosystem. We're a proponent of the code as law approach, or at least the option of code as law. But we tried to innovate there for a long time. We created the Mantis client. We had some great ideas about how to introduce DAGs and a treasury system, financial sustainability, so that we could actually be competitive and not succumb to ICO mania. And there was a dev team there that controlled the majority of the nodes and a lot of the mind share, and they just really wanted to keep things the same way, as if Vitalik's vision was okay. Even though we disagree with him on something, his vision's still law, okay. It's like one of those Japanese paradoxical situations where the emperor is both right and wrong. You disagree with the emperor, but he's right? So it's the same situation here. We disagree with Vitalik, but he's right. It's crazy cognitive fallacy. And it was really difficult for us to actually have any meaningful impact on the roadmap. And we were worried that if we didn't innovate and move quickly, that adoption would lag, the chain would continue to stagnate, and then inevitably it would be at risk for a 51% attack, which is what ended up happening. Low developer adoption, not a lot of innovation, stagnation, and finally a 51% attack. Now they can recover for it. We'd like to stay in the ecosystem if a funding source can be found to do so. But it's a lesson about all of these projects. They're only as valuable as the social network you have around them and the innovation you have within them and your ability to bounce back from bad events. And the good news is, as an outside observer, you can see this. You can look at the Reddits and see, are people coming together and focusing on solutions, or are they splitting into tribes and trying to find someone to blame and scapegoat? Are they overcoming this and trying to develop new milestones or new technologies so that they can bounce back and continue to grow, or are they hiding in their caves and just not being responsive? And very quickly, based upon their conduct of the key leaders and the key community members, you can tell if the cryptocurrency is solid and strong or the cryptocurrency is not long for this world. And that's great for us as an industry because it means we're ultimately Darwinian. The bad ideas will sink to the bottom and the good ideas will float to the top. And very quickly, we'll end up with a much more resilient and strong ecosystem.
Oh, well, I appreciate the candid response, Charles. It was very interesting hearing a perspective on that. And I think you touched on a point that I may have not given enough consideration to, was the social aspect, because, I think the price of a coin is a good indicator. If you kind of take the median and block out the noise, is a good indicator of overall sentiment and thus the social construct of how people are feeling about it at any given time. And one thing that really surprised me is the resilience of the Ethereum Classic coin's price despite the attack. So, coming from your perspective, that's really telling me that there is people that still believe in it, that people it has a strong community, that people still see value in it. And I guess when you take the ideals of decentralization, that's just as important of a fact as anything, isn't it?
Yeah. I tend to concern myself a bit less with price because it's easy to gain that. I mean, you have to look at a lot of factors like liquidity, price over a length of time, the ratio of the price to Bitcoin. You also have to look at things like the amount of installed nodes, if that's increasing or decreasing, the amount of transactions going on in the network, how many surrogates you have in the network. There's a lot of factors there, but price can be a good market-based aggregation of how these things work. But it's not the end-all, be-all. And, I've been in it long enough to see the top 10 change many, many, many times. So you come in, you come out of the top 10. It's like, okay, just wait your turn. You never lose you don't lose it. You just lose your turn. You'll be back. You're the real deal.
Yeah. All right. So why don't we move on to Cardano? So the roadmap. So you've recently released Plutus and Marlow. Why don't you give us a bit of a breakdown on what those are and how significant they were in terms of Cardano's bigger picture?
So there's really three threads of hard work that we're doing at the moment. One involves consensus and scalability and just the design and architecture of cryptocurrencies, and that's reflected by Byron and Shelley. One of them involves what cryptocurrencies can do, so behaviors and capabilities. And Plutus, Marlow, Yella, and also interoperability concepts like sidechains, they fall into that category. And then one thread involves the sustainability component. That's the who pays and who decides side of a cryptocurrency. And so that's where we're thinking about voting and a treasury system and so forth. Now, in particular, Marlow and Plutus are pretty exciting because they come on the back of a 2-year investigation done by PL experts. So we have this unfortunate situation right now in the cryptocurrency space where a lot of the programming languages, scripting languages, are made by amateurs who've never really designed a programming language before, or they've taken a PL class that was 10 years ago or something, and they're just doing their best. And programming language design is an art form and a science, and it's something you can study for decades and still make mistakes and still not quite be optimal. So what we did is we put a really amazing team together, led by Phil Wadler and Manuel Chakrabarty and others. And Phil created the Haskell programming language. Manuel is a legend in that space. And we basically said, you have a clean slate. Let's take a look at the business and technical domain that smart contracts cover and the types of features and capabilities we'd like to have for them. And then let's just go see where the science leads us. Let's go see where the process leads us. And if we have to do 35 iterations, we'll do 35 iterations. We ended up doing, I think, 15 or 16. So we got pretty close to it. But we got to the point where the operational semantics of Plutus could be written on a dinner napkin, one of those paper napkins. It's pretty amazing how concise we got things. But anyway, the output of this process is this beautiful multi-layered model where if you're talking about financial contracts, so multi-sig or complicated trade finance deals or derivatives or futures contracts, you can write those in a domain-specific language built from the ground up to make writing these types of things simple. Imagine it almost like a periodic table of elements for finance, and then you look at financial contracts as molecules, and you go and stitch them together. You get your H2O of the space. And there it's nifty because they're simple, they're concise, they're easy to verify that the behavior is correct, and they're intrinsically Turing complete. So you can show things like termination and it's guaranteed and so forth. But then when you go beyond that, you're going to want rich applications. And with those rich applications, you have to write those in a more verbose language. But those applications don't live just on a blockchain. They live in a developer triangle. They live on the server, the client, and the blockchain. So you have to be able, as a developer, to sort out all these different code bases. And right now, what the Ethereum model and other models are doing is saying, well, we'll take care of the blockchain thing, but you're just going to have to figure out how that server-client relationship is going to be and figure out how to stitch these stuff on. And we're not really going to hold your hand on that. Good luck. And then the tendency is to say, well, this is all so hard, I'm just going to centralize as much as I can on a server, and you kind of kill the dApp side. So what we did instead is say, let's take Plutus and Haskell together. And Plutus will be an embeddable language within Haskell, and that's where you're going to write all your smart contract logic. And then Haskell you can use to write your server logic and your client-side logic. And we're going a step further, allowing the Haskell to compile to JavaScript or to WebAssembly. And when you put that whole stack together, that means you can deploy your application as a node package or as a browser application using standard web tools that everybody already knows how to do. But then you can also verify that the whole stack is correct. So you can have a specification like an ERC20 token, or you can have a specification for multi-sig or whatever your contract happens to be. And then you can prove that the code you've written follows that, so you won't have a parity bug, or you won't have a DAO bug, or you won't have these subtle bugs where coins can be counterfeited or something like that. But at the same time, you can deploy your application using Electron or Chrome, or you deploy your application to things that, as a web developer, most people would understand fully. So that's kind of the best of both worlds. But to get there, it does require quite a bit of PL research. Like we have guys right now working on GHC.js to improve its usability. So we have a very natural compilation path from Haskell to JavaScript. We're still working on the deployment model for applications, and Daedalus will turn into kind of a universal wallet and an app platform, so we can get one-click install. And we're working a lot on the tooling at the moment for Plutus to try to get a standard developers kit and some good libraries for it, and also some good debugging verification tools for it. So it's hard to build an ecosystem out, but we have quite a large team on it. A lot of them are very known commodities. I think Watler's H-index is in the 70s. He's got 25,000 citations. He's kind of the Papa Bear of the Haskell world. He's a smart guy, and it's really cool to have these discussions. The other cool thing is because we did the rigor, it allowed us to start having conversations with other programming language theorists. When we had Plutus Fest in December in Edinburgh, we invited people from St. Andrews, from Glasgow, from people from Cambridge, UCL, Imperial to come on up and say, hey, look at our stuff, and does this remind you of it? And we ended up having great conversations about resource-aware ML and all kinds of cool ideas and projects that have been in the PL space for 30 years that mainstream engineers are not aware of, that if we make strategic bets on some of these things, we'd be able to take them from the lab into the product and then considerably have a magical developer experience, which is considerably better than the existing developer experiences. Now, Plutus and Marlowe aren't the only ways to write smart contracts in the Cardano system. We also want to be interoperable with Ethereum, so you can write contracts in Solidity. And we have a vision for how we're going to get as many languages as possible into the stack. But the point is that all of this is being done by people who have studied programming language theory for a lot of years, and a lot of them have ended up working in industry. Like they worked with Oracle and Sun on getting lambdas into Java. They've worked on property-based testing for mainstream languages, things like that. So they're used to commercial expectations, and they're used to productization of their ideas. It's not just theory or academia, but at the same time, they can do the theory. And as a consequence, we can get strong math formal guarantees that the languages are going to behave in certain ways, and you're not going to have bizarre bugs that end up costing you billions of dollars sneaking their way in, despite the fact that all your tests pass, and despite the fact that you as a developer did your job correctly.
Yeah, as a non-developer, Charles, this is one thing I've wondered quite a bit, and I'm interested in your perspective on. So a lot of these protocols, will have multiple programming languages. Quite clearly, having multiple programming languages probably adds in additional system complexity, but does it reduce the capabilities of what a decentralized application can perform with one language versus another, or do all these languages merely increase the developer user base and the capabilities stay the same?
That's a great question, and it's actually an unknown answer. If you look at the PL space in general, you have ecosystems that are intensely opinionated. For example, Ruby on Rails. They say this is the way you build something. And there might be another way to do it, but screw you. You're just going to do it this way. And if you do it this way and you really drink the Kool-Aid and buy all the seminar books and you go down that road, somehow you'll reach developer nirvana and everything will be great. Clojure is much the same way. It's almost a cult. The Clojure community is great. I love Rich Hickey. He comes out there like programming Bob Ross, and he's got the curly hair, and he's like a little atom over here, a little macro here. And you're like, oh yeah, this guy's great. And it's wonderful Kool-Aid to drink. And for the types of problems those ecosystems can solve, not only does it allow you to solve them, it allows you to solve them with clarity, speed, and just a really fun experience. Then there are other ecosystems that are really focused on being everything to everyone. C++, Java, .NET stuff like C#. And they say, look, I don't know who you are, what your problem is, but whatever you got, I got something in the back of the warehouse that's going to solve your problem. Now, unfortunately, because you want to be everything to be everyone, it means that you lack the specialization to really give you the syntactic sugar and the developer experience to make your development experience fun and pleasant. If you look at large-scale enterprise Java applications, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. They're just ugly. They're really ugly. You look at the code and you're just like, God, it's going to take me 2 months to figure out what the hell is going on and read all the documentation. When you're trying to debug these systems, it's a damn nightmare. And there's just this huge technical debt you end up naturally, organically accruing as a consequence of how these tools work. Now, domain experts can come in and say, oh, Charles is just full of crap. And there are ways to maintain big, complicated systems without incurring technical debt, and we can still have a good development experience. And what you usually end up finding is that they actually go down the Ruby route. And what they do is they develop a very particular set of tools and philosophies that they apply to a general purpose language like Java. And then suddenly they get clarity. It's like, well, yeah, but you could have just as well adopted domain-specific framework for that. So anyway, it's a big debate. It's a holy war in the PL world, and we're getting caught up in it because we're developing programming languages. We're talking to developers, and so what you have to be is a pragmatist. You have to say, okay, what do developers understand, and what can I preserve of what they currently understand? They get the web, they get JavaScript, they get Angular, they get React, they get all these frameworks. They get that server-client model and architecture. They understand that pretty well. And some of them get .NET development, some of them get Java development, and they understand how apps used to be built, or some enterprise apps still are built. Okay, so they get these types of things. If you talk about service-oriented architecture, microservices, you're going to get a lot of people say, oh, I kind of understand what you're doing. What they don't get, they don't usually get design by contract or specification-driven development, or using property-based testing, or any of these exotic techniques that come from the formal methods world. And they don't get usually designing financial contracts. It's a very domain-specific skill for a lot of developers. Okay, so when you're dealing with concepts like trust, privacy, money, regulation, tight specification-driven development, unless you're talking to people in regulated industries or the health industry or the aerospace industry, you're probably not going to get an average developer that looks at these things with a great degree of clarity. Now, there are exceptions. There's Eiffel developers and Spark developers and others who they kind of, this is their wheelhouse. But for the most part, if you had a scale and you put all the developers that don't get that versus the ones that do, you're going to see the tips in one direction. So the key to innovate is keep things as familiar as possible, but at the same time, gradually introduce slightly uncomfortable concepts that will dramatically improve your productivity or efficiency or give you new capabilities. So in the case of smart contracts, we have to find a way to gradually introduce smart contracts into the cryptocurrency, into the general developer population. Now, if you look at the Ethereum model, their method of doing that was to make Solidity look a lot like JavaScript and say, well, because this language looks a lot like the languages you're used to working with, you should be comfortable with this, which was a really, in my view, bad mistake because they're not the same. They're totally different development domains, and the price of failure is extremely high. And a lot of smart contracts are very poorly designed and have very subtle bugs that are extremely difficult to detect in many cases because that language is working against you. So instead, you need a language that looks a lot more like Haskell or Eiffel or any of these other languages that have been built from the ground up specifically to give you strong guarantees. And then people say, oh, well, that means the developers' productivity goes down or they have to learn all these new tools. Well, not necessarily. I mean, look at what the Elixir community has done. Erlang is not really developer friendly, but what they did is they took all these great concepts out of Erlang and then they kind of upgraded them and preserved them, but then made it more like a Ruby style. Ruby meets functional programming development experience. And then suddenly Elixir is like a fun language to code in, but it's introducing all these great new things that you never probably did as a Ruby developer or as a JavaScript developer. And lo and behold, you get all this Erlang goodness that you never even thought was possible. It just blows your mind. Dave Thomas is a guy who runs Pragmatic Publishing, and he has this exercise he does whenever he learns a new programming language, where he writes a markup parser in the programming language, and that's a sufficiently complicated task that it's probably going to teach you all the ins and outs of the language. So you learn Python, write a markup parser. Learn Ruby, write a markup parser. Well, he did it with Elixir, and after he did it, he said, "I never want to go back. I never want to go back to any of these other languages because this is just so amazing and it's so concise and the code is so readable and the experience was legitimately fun." Oh, and then by the way, he's actually using a lot of Erlang concepts under the hood, but they were introduced in a really sexy, cool way. So that's the ultimate challenge that we all have in the spaces. How do we do something like that? How do we take this old hard stuff that most people don't do, and when they do, they're paid very well, and it's very boring and very difficult, and then gradually introduce that into the space in a way that doesn't make people blow their minds, but then allow them to preserve the things that they're already comfortable with. That JavaScript development stuff and that Java development stuff and things they're used to that they're doing for cell phone applications and web applications and so forth, and then merge those two things together. It's inexact, it's imperfect. Every time you compromise, you're going to piss somebody off because it's a holy war, and they're going to disagree if you don't have their particular feature that they love, and they're going to say everything's shit. But at the end of the day, you're dealing with averages, not particulars. You're looking at the overall experience, the overall productivity, and the overall amount of developer adoption. Another thing that Consensus did, as just one final point, is that they tried to market, especially in 2017, the inevitability of Ethereum, and pretended like all the developers are in Ethereum. All the developers, we've already won. We're the standard. And if you actually looked at the amount of people writing production Solidity code in a commercial setting compared to an Android developer, an iOS developer, or a regular everyday JavaScript developer, it was just orders of magnitude more on the legacy languages than the Solidity language. So what does that mean? It means no standard has been set. It means no one has won. We're still trying to figure this stuff out, and it's going to take a while to get there. And in some cases, we're going to have to break compatibility with the past and be uncomfortable and introduce people to new things. The iPhone had to do it. Totally different way of writing applications, totally different way of dealing with experiences. We used to be using mice and keyboards, and that's your user interface. Now I have touch. You go from something with a resolution of 1 pixel to something as fat as your finger. That's a big difference, man. And it fundamentally meant that the development paradigm had to change, but it had a huge payoff because you got the App Store and one-click installs, and you got like the ability to auto-update easily. You got a much more secure deployment model. You got better curation for the customer. You got much simpler applications, and because we didn't have any of that legacy stuff we had to worry about, you could actually throw away all the bad habits and things that we'd inherited from the 1980s and 1990s. And similarly, there's going to be some of that in the cryptocurrency space where we just bite the bullet and we force people to learn about writing specifications and verifying that their code is correct against it. But remember, we're not talking about large programs here. We're talking about 500 lines of code, 1,000 lines of code with a very well-defined business logic. And actually writing the specification is 90% of the job of the smart contract developer, because you have to understand if the contract matches your commercial intent. Does it match what you actually sold, what you claimed you were going to do? And you have to do that exercise anyway, so you might as well do it in a more formal, structured way that at the end of it you can use model checking, or at the end of it you can prove that the code you've implemented actually follows that, and as a consequence is bug-free or near bug-free.
Oh, I appreciate the response. That was really interesting. That's extremely interesting. And one little thing I picked up on there through that, Charles, was when you mentioned how developers, and actually the same goes for all roles in this industry, is the need to at least gain a basic understanding of economics and money, because it's so intrinsically tied with these protocols. And I think that's what really attracted me to this industry first, was just how complicated it was. And I was like, this is pretty much the pinnacle of anything I can work in at this time. I mean, this stuff is hard, and it has taken me many, many hours, hundreds, thousands of hours to fully gain the perspective and understanding that I have now. And I am still, I would say I still have a long road ahead of me.
I'm right there with you, man.
I mean, and because things change so often, and this industry moves so quick, and it's got this internet culture around it as well. It's just such a dynamic and interesting and exciting space to be in. Do you think, though, that that's going to create a barrier of entry for the skill sets that we need in this industry, especially developers? Developers are the most important at the moment, because they have to gain this separate understanding of money and economics and finance, and the importance of writing good code due to the potential outcomes of what can happen if it's not good. Obviously, like you were mentioning earlier with the bugs, there can be dire consequences if things aren't done properly. What's your kind of perspective on that?
My perspective is: do you want an untrained person performing surgery on you? Do you want an untrained developer writing medical software for your pacemaker or for your insulin pump or for your radiation therapy that if the dosage is wrong, it kills you? Certain domains require certain skills, and we should not get addicted to the belief that more is better. What we should do is set the standard. This is what it takes to be a Navy SEAL. This is what it takes to be a doctor. This is what it takes to be a developer in our industry. Now, what we can do is try to lower those barriers to entry, and we can make some of these languages more accessible. But at the end of the day, there's a certain core level of professionalism, competence, and skills that are required to write quality software. And at the end of the day, the output of this process is your money. And I do not want some 22-year-old kid saying, oops, my bad, and then that means that grandma lost everything, and there's no consequences for it. That's just immoral. It's wrong. And so we as an industry have to bite the bullet and say that maybe it's not okay to have everybody writing code. It's not an elitist attitude. It's a meritocracy. You have to earn the right to do that. No one in their right mind would go and say, hey, I'm just going to go swap out all the crypto libraries in my web application with this crypto library this 17-year-old kid who just learned how to program Python wrote. I hope that they work. Maybe they're the most magical thing ever, and you're dealing with a child prodigy. More often than not, it's probably riddled with. It's probably not even right, but even if it is, it's probably riddled with problems. Why? Because writing cryptographic protocols is really hard. Most people who do that right have decades of experience. They work for intelligence agencies. They worked for the military. They were in very high-stakes scenarios where if they screwed up, people died. State secrets got lost, et cetera, et cetera. And because of those stakes were so high, they developed a level of professionalism, techniques, and competency to rise to the demands of the industry. And we're just the same. These systems inevitably will control your identity. They'll control your property rights. They'll control your privacy and human autonomy. And if they're poorly designed, the government will know all these things. And in some governments, that's a bad deal. What if you're using an anonymous messaging app in Iran and you're secretly gay? You're using it to communicate with all your friends, but it has a back door in it, and now the government can see that. You could get executed and die. What if you're advocating for a free market, or you're running an underground newspaper in North Korea? Again, you could die if you're discovered. And if a software developer makes a mistake in the implementation of these protocols, an intelligence agency, a government entity, a commercial entity will take advantage of it. And even the best people screw up. China knows how our stealth technology works. Why? Because they invested a lot of money into hacking the U.S. military contractors during the 2000s, and they were able to pull the design specs for the F-35 and the F-22 from Northrop Grumman and Lockheed and Boeing and all the other contractors that worked on these projects, and now they know. And these are military contractors working with the Department of Defense. So why then should we say we should lower the standards so that some script kiddie can go and play and participate? No, what we should rather say is, what is the ideal set of educational content that we can produce and tools we can produce that if a person really does want to come into the space, they can come in with as little friction as possible. Back in the day, it was miserable to learn cryptography or to learn how to implement a cryptographic algorithm. Before Bruce Schneier wrote Applied Crypto, pretty much you had to either go to one of a small group of schools or go work for the military or the intelligence agencies. Now we got Introduction to Modern Crypto from John Katz. We have hundreds of tutorials. If you really do want to know how cryptography works, you could spend thousands of hours doing it. And there's tons of techniques and tools and other things you can use to implement good code. And there's tons of people you can collaborate with a degree or without a degree, attached to a university, not attached to a university. But yet at the same time, there is a standard, there is a vocabulary, there is a knowledge set. And as an industry, what we need to do is get to those kernels and say, what is the vocabulary? What is the knowledge set? What are the tools? Build those, and then invite the people who are willing to come. And they will, because they can make money. And it doesn't matter if we have 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000. What matters is we have 1,000 quality developers building great applications, 10,000 quality developers building applications. And those are the people that are going to build the experiences of the future and change the world.
Now, Charles, on the educational side, IOHK, you're actually running some initiatives. You've got some Haskell courses that are coming up. Why don't you tell us a little bit about those and where they're being hosted?
So we did one in Athens, we did one in Barbados, and now we're doing one in Ethiopia. The Ethiopia one's still ongoing. The Athens and Barbados ones were successful. We hired about 50-60% of the classes. We probably will end up doing the same on the Ethiopia side, but it's too early to tell the exact proportion. But basically what we do is we enter a jurisdiction, and we usually go to one of the ministries, an education ministry or technology ministry, and we say, go to the universities and give us the best and brightest. And if they want a great job and they want an opportunity to rise to the occasion, we'll be willing to actually facilitate that journey. So we send out a really hardcore mathematician. His name is Lars Bunjas. He's a German mathematician and trained at Cambridge, and really bright guy. And he'll actually live in that country for a few months and give you some German rigor in your education. And if you pass it, if you survive it, then we say these people are pretty good. And then we give them an opportunity to join IOHK as junior developers and work on projects and put them on a career path that over an arc of time, they'll eventually become intermediate and eventually expert developers and be able to build really cool experiences and so forth. Now, what this does for us is it helps us not only recruit, but also helps us enter a jurisdiction. Because if you're trying to solve problems in a geography, you have to understand that geography. You have to know what are the problems on the ground. What keeps people up at night? Why do people do things the way they do? And it's culturally stupid just to think that you have it all figured out. People don't think the way you think, and you didn't grow up in their set of circumstances. So the best way of understanding a jurisdiction is to hire people from that jurisdiction who live with those problems, who grew up with those problems, and then build a bridge between how you think and how they think, and use them as that intermediate bridge. Then, when you're collecting business and technical requirements, when you're doing pilots, when you're actually growing the enterprise side of the business, you're in a position to actually build great software that's useful and meaningful. And you avoid a lot of mistakes that people have traditionally made when they think they know everything. No one does. We're all flawed.
And you've also got the upcoming IOHK Summit held in Miami.
Yes.
That sounds good. Miami, I wouldn't mind going there. April 17th to 18th. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the plan for the summit? What's the overall outcome? What do you want people to know? And what are some of the big names that you got going to there?
Yeah, so it's we do an internal employee summit year after year. We bring the whole company together, and we got a lot of big names in our own company. We legitimately have some of the top people in the world working with us. And every time we get together, we show all these pictures, and everybody says, "Wow, I would love to attend." And so this is the first time we've decided to make it a public event, and so we're going to try to make it super fun. So every IOHK employee is going to be there. All our researchers are going to be there. We're going to have tons of workshops and presentations. We're going to have workshops for zero knowledge snarks. We're going to try to get Cardano to work on a rock pie. We're going to be talking about what we're doing in Africa. We're probably going to get some government officials to come on over, and we'll talk about coffee. It's going to be just a great event. We're going to have a hackathon. We're going to probably give away some money. We're thinking about doing a cryptographic puzzle where we actually take some ADA and we break the 12 keywords into different puzzles. And if you solve all of them, you can get it. So we're brainstorming a lot of things. And for VIP tickets, we're going to have a special music guest from a very famous band. So that'll be fun. So it's just a great event. You'll meet everybody. I'll be there. Agalos, Duncan will be there. And you'll kind of get to see the soul and the culture of the company. and what we are doing as a company. A lot of people know us as an iceberg. They only see the tip, and they don't really see that amazing magic richness that I get to experience every day. So this is an opportunity for the general public to come and interface with us, interact with us, partner with us. We'll also try to invite a lot of people in the Cardano ecosystem to come. So I know Emergo's coming, the Foundation's coming, try to get the Cardano Effect people coming. So if you're a fan of Cardano, this is the place to be. Also, if I was ever going to announce a new product, these types of events would be a good place to do that. So I have a keynote. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. We'll see. So I highly recommend you come. We tried to make the tickets as affordable as we could. We looked at over 100 different cryptocurrency conferences, and we're right now in the middle of the pack in terms of ticket pricing. And I think around February 18th, we're going to support accepting ADA for tickets. So if you want to buy in USD or ADA, we'll let you do that. And we just want as many people as possible to come. And Miami that time of year is beautiful. It's not too hot. The weather's perfect. It's just a beautiful place to visit. It's really laid back. It's relaxed. Yet at the same time, there's tons of stuff to do. Go out the Everglades and play with alligators if you want, or you can just lay on the beach. It's just a great experience.
Oh, geez, you've sold me, Charles. I'll have to jump on and book a couple of tickets. Sounds excellent. Now, guys, just so you know, too, I'll put links down in the description to the conference website. So if you are interested, you can go and check it out. And I'll also put links to IOHK and Cardano as well. Now, Charles, I think I'm going to wrap that up there. That's been nearly an hour. I just want to say a huge thank you for your time coming on. You're incredibly insightful and knowledgeable, and anyone who watches this interview is going to get an immense amount of value from it. So just before we go, big thanks from me again. Is there anywhere people can find you on, any platforms you'd like them to follow you on, or any websites you'd like to mention?
Yeah, my Twitter feed's probably the easiest way of getting in contact with me, or Telegram. So my Telegram name is IOHK Charles, all one word. And Twitter is IOHK_Charles. And if you could put those into the show notes, that'd be great. But outside of that, you can just reach me at my email, charles.hoskinson@iohk.io. If you have a question, send me something. I try to reply to all of them, or my secretary does. Overall, it's just great to be in the space. And it's just been fun the last 7 years to see how we've gone from pretty much nothing to this global movement. And we really are starting to redefine how money works and society works, and make it a bit more global, a bit more fair, and preserve our integrity and our principles and our privacy at the same time.
Well, Charles, a huge thanks again from me. You're welcome back on the show anytime.
Cheers. Thank you so much. And I hope to see everybody at the summit. Please come. It's going to be a great event.
All right. See you guys. Cheers.